let me just go back and say, because when you said in the beginning of your comments here, like Islam is a complete worldview,
Yeah.
traditionally speaking, before the modern period began, like say, go back, say just like 300 years and before that, in most major cultures in the world, probably all of them, religion performed that function, whether it was for Muslims,
Mm.
even like Christians, Jews, any other group, like your religion was your worldview. It was that you didn't really need to say it. So if you were not Muslim, you were Christian, you were Jewish, you were Hindu, you were Buddhist, you were whatever. But the idea that you didn't have a religion and that it was not something that was kind of expected to be a very strong determinant of who you were and how you lived in the world, that was very foreign to people. There was no kind of secular option, so to speak. Do you know what I'm saying? There was no such thing as a secular worldview. That wasn't available. In Europe, in the West, in the 17th and 18th centuries and beyond, a fundamental process began to occur, or continued from earlier trends, which ended up secularizing the worldview and moving away from Christianity. If you go back to Shakespeare, for example, who was writing in the early 17th century, so he's born in the maybe 80s, I don't remember his dates, but late 1500s, and he dies like early, mid 1600s, right? If you go back to some of his plays, all of the plays and all of the characters in his play are Christian, right? They don't wear it on their sleeve, but when they talk, they say, there is a king above us all who judges every king. And when we die, we will stand before our maker for judgment. Like this is all within his plays. And if you spoke that way today, they'd say, oh, that's like a Christian play. Like it's a niche, like for some religious, but back then that was just taken for granted by everybody. There was nobody who didn't believe that, right? And Shakespeare was just writing for a general British audience or English speaking audience. He was not writing to quote unquote Christians, but that was everybody's worldview. Everybody believed when you die, you're going to be resurrected, you're going to be judged. There is a God that stands above us all. He's the one who sets the rules. Like this was just common belief, right? Now, when you move into the modern period, for many different reasons, this starts to get unseated. And after the scientific revolution and then into the 18th century, you have the Enlightenment. And the Enlightenment project, it tries to base all of human knowledge on basically two sources, human reason and basically empirical science. And it puts revelation to the side. And it says we're no longer really taking that seriously. Also, they started looking at the Bible more critically, and they found out the Bible just has many issues about just its textual integrity and its authenticity and so forth. So for many different reasons, the Bible kind of like it dropped in people's eyes in the West, and it fell out as a reliable source of knowledge. And the idea was to put all of knowledge, including ethical knowledge and moral knowledge, on reason and empirical science. That's the entire modern project. And this worldview, it gets first like formulated and hammered out by, philosophers in the 18th century. That's why they call the 18th century the Age of Enlightenment. And then in the 19th century, this worldview, it kind of trickles down to the everyday person. In the beginning of the 19th century, it's still, you cannot get hired in a European university if you're known to be an atheist. It would be like unthinkable. How could we hire an atheist to teach people? And how could you trust, it was just totally unacceptable. It's like unimaginable to people that you could be an atheist. It was very, very taboo. This is just 200 years ago. By the end of the 19th century, you have Nietzsche, Friedrich Nietzsche, the German philosopher, declaring, quote unquote, God is dead, astaghfirullah, right? So there's a huge change that occurs over the 19th century. Of course, you have Darwin, Darwinism right in the middle, which also contributes culturally to this kind of feeling of the retreat of the divine, if you want. And so then, of course, the 19th century is the age of colonization, right? Of course, in India, it starts already in the 18th century with the British East India Company, but really it's the 18th and 19th century, particularly, that almost the entire globe, both the Muslim world and other, parts of the world, come under direct European control and hegemony. And then at that time, these ideas and systems and ways of doing things get exported, through like colonial mechanisms. Right. And so this worldview, and also the aspect of liberalism as a philosophy, right? Liberalism as kind of a moral philosophy, as a political philosophy, also gains. There's some noise here because I'm on a main road, so I apologize for that.
No problem.
Liberalism also becomes the main kind of ideological driving force, and that also gets exported. Liberalism basically comes down to this idea that it looks at the whole modern worldview. It looks at people very individualistically. The individual is kind of the center of attention, not the family, not the tribe, not the religious group. It's the individual, right? So maximizing the freedom of the individual and maximizing individual possibilities and all of this. This is very deeply ingrained in the modern consciousness. And this also gets exported kind of, throughout the world through modern education systems and all of this. First being run directly by like the colonial powers, Britain, especially in your part of the world, France, and other parts of the world like North Africa and so forth. And then even when these powers leave, right, India becomes independent of British rule, North Africa becomes independent of French rule. Nevertheless, they leave governmental systems in place, state systems in place, educational systems in place, that although now they're run by the former colonized peoples, it's the same model. Do you see what I'm saying? And in many cases, it's the same worldview and the same assumptions that continue to live on and get propagated by even people in the post-colonial period, right? Because they've become so dominant in the modern world that people just think, oh, well, this is just what it means to be modern.